Write to us in the comments about which corner of the world you're watching us from. We want to get to know you. The wind wasn't screaming, it was simply pushing. Pushing with that kind of force that makes no noise but gets into your bones. That was the weather that day in the mountains of northern Arizona. It had been snowing since morning and didn't seem like it would stop. The tops of the pine trees were covered in a white mist that didn't move. Everything was still, everything except him. Jan Merritt was chopping wood like he did every winter. At 35, he had the back of a man who knew the weight of the past and the silence of the present. He had been to war. He had lost his wife and had lived alone ever since in a cabin built by his own hands in a place where no one arrived by chance, no visitors, no neighbors, just routine cold and wood. But that afternoon, something interrupted the pattern. A noise, just a creak in the snow. It wasn't the sound of an animal. It was more irregular, more human. Jan stood still, the axe still in his hand, looked towards the edge of the forest, and then he saw her. A trembling figure was crawling among the trees. It was a woman. She was barefoot, barely covered by a torn leather dress, her legs sinking into the snow. She was thin, with dark skin and braided black hair. Her face reflected exhaustion, not hatred or fear, just something Jan recognized well, resistance at its limit. She was Apache, and that in the middle of winter was not normal. No one from her tribe would be walking alone through these lands in that condition unless she had been left behind. Jan didn't move. He had learned to be cautious. Sometimes misfortune was a trap, but this woman could barely walk. She carried no backpack, no weapons, not even boots. When she reached the porch, she fell to her knees. Her body swayed as if willpower was pushing her more than strength. She looked up at him with her voice broken by the cold. "Please let me in." Jan clenched his jaw and didn't respond. "Can I reward you?" she added, this time with her teeth chattering. He said nothing. He could close the door, let the storm finish what it had started. It would be easy. No one would know, no one would judge him, but instead he took a step. He crouched down and looked at her carefully. He saw no traps, just a woman on the edge. "Can you walk?" he asked. She barely shook her head, so he decided. He lifted her firmly and without saying more carried her inside. The door slammed shut behind them. Inside, the cabin was simple, but the heat was immediate. The fire had been burning since before noon, and on the stove a pot of beans released an earthy, domestic aroma almost forgotten. Jan left the woman on a rug by the hearth. Then he went straight to the cot to get the thickest blanket he had. She said nothing. Her body, barely leaning against the stone of the chimney, rose and fell with shallow breathing. Her eyes opened and closed, trying to understand the space. She didn't feel safe yet. He glanced at her out of the corner of his eye while taking out a tin cup. He poured hot water into it with a little salt and a dash of honey, the little that was left from the previous summer. "Drink it slowly," he said, handing her the cup. "If you throw it up, I'm not cleaning it." She took the cup with both hands. She was trembling, everything about her was trembling. Still, she managed to bring it to her lips. She drank slowly, measured, as if she knew that each sip was a step further away from death. Jan didn't ask questions, didn't ask for explanations, not even her name. He just watched her as she breathed. It wasn't hospitality, it was something else. He didn't believe in charity, but he also couldn't watch someone die before his eyes, not after what he had seen in the war. He didn't speak again, didn't ask for anything, didn't cry either. She just stayed still with attentive eyes and feet wrapped in the blanket. Jan knelt down, took one of her feet and inspected it. Red, stiff, cracked skin, but still no signs of necrosis. "Keep your feet off the ground," he told her. "If they get colder, you'll lose them." She didn't respond, just looked at him for a moment, as if unsure whether this was an order or an act of care. It didn't matter, she let herself be helped. He placed a basin of warm water in front of the hearth and rubbed her feet with a damp cloth without saying another word. Then he covered her with another blanket. She wasn't trembling as much anymore. Her eyes were beginning to focus. He ate dinner in silence, sitting at the table with a plate of beans and a piece of hard bread. He looked at her from time to time. She was already asleep, curled up under the blankets, her face turned towards the fire. Her hands were clasped over her chest like someone who didn't want to take up space. Outside, the storm continued. The wind beat against the cabin walls like a memory that didn't want to leave, but inside, the heat held on, and in the middle of that shared silence, without promises, without names, without a destination, something remained alive. She was there, breathing, and for now, that was enough. The snow fell all night, not in gusts, but with a silent consistency that covered everything: the fences, the roof, the memories. Outside, the world sank under a white blanket. Inside, the fire never went out. Every hour, Jan got up to add more wood, not out of habit, but for something he himself couldn't name. Maybe because of her, maybe because he was no longer alone. The woman, who still hadn't said her name, remained silent, not out of fear or coldness, but out of a kind of respect. She didn't ask, didn't demand, didn't even flinch when he unrolled her feet to continue warming them with a damp cloth. She just looked at him with open, reserved eyes, like someone who had learned to expect nothing and therefore appreciated every small gesture without words. When she finally fell asleep, with her knees bent and her body wrapped up to her neck, Jan left an extra quilt beside her. He didn't touch her. He didn't want to disturb that space that had formed between them. A new, fragile space. He ate dinner in silence. He chewed slowly, watching the storm through the fogged-up glass. He couldn't stop thinking about her. What tribe, what story, why was she alone, barefoot, and on the brink of death? He knew the cold here could kill in less than an hour. He had seen it in the war in his own child. At midnight she moved, opened her eyes, but didn't look at him. She observed the fire, then her bandaged feet resting on the warm basin. She tried to speak, but only a sigh came out. Jan looked at her from the table. "You're lucky they're still pink," he said in a low voice. "Another hour and you would have lost them." Their eyes met for the first time since she entered, and then she spoke. "I walked for 2 days," Jan frowned, "without boots." She shook her head. "They took them from me when they threw me out." He fell silent. He didn't need more. "Who threw you out?" "My people." The answer didn't come with rage, it came with a resignation so heavy it filled the cabin. Jan didn't ask why, he understood, not with words but with her gaze, with the way she said it. It was the truth, and the truth didn't always come with explanations. "Are you hungry?" he asked after a moment. She hesitated and nodded slightly. Jan stood up without saying more. He served a handful of hot beans in a bowl and cut a thick piece of bread. He placed it in front of her along with a spoon. She took it with hands still trembling but didn't rush. She ate slowly with that solemn manner of those who have been too hungry. Every bite seemed calculated, every swallow a pact with life. She finished barely half before setting the bowl aside. She adjusted the blanket over her shoulders. Jan sat in front of her without intruding. He just watched her patiently. "What's your name?" he asked bluntly. "Tala," she answered, barely moving her lips. "I'm Jan." She nodded slightly. Then she turned her face back to the fire as if she already knew that the name didn't change anything, yet it meant everything. He was about to leave the conversation there, but then something caught his attention. Her clothes weren't travel or work clothes. What remained of the dress was ceremonial. The seams, the cut, even the type of leather spoke of something important, a formal event, a position. Jan lowered his voice. "You were important." Tala's jaw tightened, but she didn't deny it. "I was his wife," she said without adornment. Jan leaned back a little. That explained the dress, the bone necklace, the firm posture, even now in her battered state. "Did you have children?" She looked at him directly. "No, not with him." The answer landed like a stone on the table, firm, closed, and yet not bitter, just charged with what no longer needed explanation. Jan nodded respectfully. "You can stay," he said without drama, "until the weather improves." Tala didn't say thank you, but the silence that followed was different, more human, less distant. He didn't expect gratitude, and she wasn't asking for charity, just to survive, together, even if not named as such. That night Jan unrolled an extra cot. He placed it on the other side of the room, near the stove. He offered her another blanket. She got up slowly, leaning on the table. Her feet hurt, but she didn't need help. He turned to give her privacy, and just when he thought there would be no more words, he heard her. "You're alone," she said. "You too." It wasn't a question, it was an observation. He nodded. 8 years. She didn't ask what had happened, and he didn't explain. There was no need. Outside, the wind continued to beat, but inside, something had broken, or perhaps opened. And although it wasn't warm between them yet, for the first time, it was no longer cold. At dawn, the world was no longer visible. The snow had buried the yard, completely covering the fence. Even the chicken coop had become a white lump against the horizon. The sky was still low, pale, tight with more storm, but Jan was already outside. Shovel in hand, he cleared the path to the barn. Each breath turned into a thick cloud that froze his beard. He wasn't in a hurry. He knew the key to surviving in this place was to move steadily, not hastily. Check the livestock, just 2 cows, and put fresh straw in their stalls. If he neglected the work, the roof would collapse. If he didn't feed the animals, they wouldn't last long. He wasn't going to lose everything out of laziness, not after surviving 2 winters in this god-forsaken place. Meanwhile, inside, Tala woke to the smell of the stove and the gentle crackle of the beans. Her legs still burned, her feet ached, but something had changed. She could wiggle her toes. A minor detail, but decisive. She lay still for a few seconds, assessing the damage. Then she scanned the cabin with her gaze, this time more attentively. The way it was organized, the rifle hanging on the wall, the unadorned table. It was a man's space, of someone who didn't expect company nor sought it. She sat up slowly, wrapping herself in the blanket. She tried placing her feet on the floor. It hurt, yes, but not enough to stop her. Limping, she approached the stove. She held onto the table, balancing each step as if crossing an invisible bridge. That's how Jan found her when he returned, her back to him, one hand on the edge of the stove, trying to serve herself some food. "You should have waited," he said, closing the door with a sharp thud. She didn't turn around. "I'm not helpless." He didn't argue. He took off his gloves, left his scarf, and walked to the wash basin. "That doesn't mean you're not hurt." Finally, Tala turned her face, looking at him over her shoulder. Her eyes were still alert, but no longer defensive. "I can do small things." Jan nodded. "Okay, but don't fall." He approached, adjusted the flame, and served 2 plates. He handed her one without ceremony. They ate together in silence, but it wasn't the silence of the previous night. This one was different, practical, shared. In the middle of the meal, Jan asked what he had been ruminating all morning. "Where were you going?" Tala chewed slowly. "Nowhere." He frowned. "Then why were you walking?" She held his gaze. "I wasn't supposed to survive." The phrase hung in the air like an open door to the void. Jan didn't answer immediately. His hand tightened around the edge of the tin cup. It wasn't a conscious reaction. It was what he did when something hurt and he didn't want it to show. He didn't need more details. He understood. They cast you out to die, he said without drama, just the truth. Tala nodded once. It's what's done, she murmured, looking at the wood of the table as if speaking to it. Jan knew cruelty. He had seen atrocities in the war, but this was something else. It wasn't hatred, it was abandonment. Ritualized, silent abandonment, legal within a world that justified it with tradition. You don't seem like someone who gives up easily, he finally said. Tala frowned slightly, as if those words touched her in a place she didn't yet know belonged to her. I didn't want to die, she confessed, but I accepted it. There was no tears, no complaints. It was as if she were talking about another person, a chapter that wasn't finished, but at least no longer completely defined her. Jan got up, gathered the bowls, and took them to the wash basin. You can stay, he repeated, this time more firmly. As long as you need, there's space. Tala looked at him truly, not as someone hearing a courtesy. She measured him, and found no doubt in him. He wasn't offering shelter out of pity. He was offering what he had because he believed he should, and that was hard to find anywhere. That afternoon, she asked him for a knife. What for? He asked warily. My hair, she said, pointing to the dark braid. It's dirty, tangled. I don't want to keep carrying the past on my back. He said nothing. He handed her a small, multi-purpose knife. She took it without ceremony and went to sit by the fire. Jan didn't watch her while she did it, but later he saw the black braid lying by the embers. She had cut it cleanly just below her shoulders. Her face was no longer the same. It looked freer. That night, Tala helped peel potatoes while he prepared the meat for salting. Her movements were slow but skilled. Her hands, though marked, were not clumsy. She knew what she was doing. She didn't ask about the face-down photos on the shelf, nor about the years of loneliness hanging from every nail in that cabin. And he didn't ask about the chief or the children that never came, but something was clear. She didn't come from a soft life. She had worked the land, lit fires, tanned hides, and survived everything. That night before the fire died, she asked in a low voice, "Did your wife die here?" Jan stood still for a second, then nodded. It wasn't the cold, it was a fever. My son caught it too. Tala didn't cry. She just nodded. And yet you stayed. There was nothing left below worth staying for, he said without raising his voice. Silence fell, but this time it wasn't a cold silence. It was a bridge, a me too, and I understand. You're not like most white men, Tala said without adornment. Jan didn't respond, not because he didn't feel it, but because he understood it wasn't a compliment, it was an observation. And for the first time since she crossed the threshold, neither of them felt the other was something temporary. By the fourth morning, the snow had stopped falling with fury, but it was still present as a silent warning. There was no blue sky, but the wind no longer howled. It just pushed like a tired giant. Jan noticed it immediately. The axe no longer dug in with so much effort. The doors stopped jamming by midday, and the cows breathed more freely. It was the kind of change only someone accustomed to the mountain could notice. Inside the cabin, the change was subtler but more important. Tala no longer needed help to stand. She still limped, yes, but she moved with a silent determination. She gathered wood, peeled vegetables, made the cot without anyone asking. She didn't talk much, but Jan no longer expected her to. When her voice appeared, it did so with the exact weight, no waste. That morning, while feeding the fire, he heard a strange sound, metal scraping wood, and a muffled whisper. He turned and saw her. Tala was struggling to carry the water bucket from the stove to the wash basin. Her hands, still damaged by the cold, trembled. Her grip was weak, but she insisted. You don't have to do that, he said, crossing the room. I want to, she replied without letting go of the bucket. Let me do something. Jan didn't argue. He took the bucket from her with firm hands, set it down without spilling a single drop, and looked at her. She didn't protest, just took a step back, acknowledging that it wasn't surrender but care, and then she let it out. It wasn't me, she said suddenly. Jan frowned, not understanding. It wasn't me who couldn't have children, she clarified, looking at the empty bucket. He didn't interrupt, just sat down. He was old, Tala said, older than my father. He chose me for the ceremony. They said it was a blessing, but when the children didn't come, everything changed. Jan swallowed. He blamed you, Tala nodded once, and everyone believed him. Were you sure the problem wasn't you? He asked gently. She held his gaze. Yes, there was a boy years ago. We were young, no one knew. I got pregnant, but I lost the baby early. There was no shame in her voice, no drama, just a need to put the truth on the table, not to convince anyone, just to cleanse herself. When the bleeding returned 2 moons ago, I knew I still could, she said, but it was too late. They had already cast me out. Jan nodded slowly, and everything fell into place. The ceremonial dress, the abandonment, the lack of preparation, the barely whole body. No one gave her boots or food, they just expelled her as if she were a mistake to be forgotten. He got up and went to a shelf. He returned with a box wrapped in leather. From it he took 3 things, a bar of soap, a comb, and a pair of worn but clean wool socks. He placed them in front of her without a word. Tala looked at them for a long moment and for the first time said it. Thank you. She didn't say it as something automatic. She said it as someone who understands that this gesture was not minor. That afternoon, while he worked outside repairing the shed roof, Tala stayed inside. She heated melted snow water, sat in front of the stove, and washed her hair with slow movements, without hurry, as if each rinse was a way to recover something she had lost. When he returned, he found her with her hair freshly braided, clean, tied with a piece of twine. her back straighter, her face clearer, and over the ceremonial dress, now silently mended, one of his flannel shirts, sleeves rolled up and tucked into an improvised belt. She didn't walk fast, but she walked with purpose. That night, while the stew bubbled on the stove, Jan dared to ask something that had been circling him since the day she crossed the fence. Were you planning to go back when the snow melted? Tala didn't answer right away. She stirred the pot, eyes fixed on the steam. There's nowhere to go back to, she finally said, and your people, they're not mine anymore. She offered no more details, and he didn't ask for them. After a comfortable silence, it was she who asked, have you been here long? 7 years, maybe 8. Why this place? After the war I came west. I was looking for land and silence. I found both. Did your wife like it? He lowered his gaze. She never saw it. I was building this when she died. Tala nodded silently. I'm sorry. He made a slight gesture with his head, like someone accepting condolences without seeking comfort. We're not the only ones who have lost something. That night they ate together again, but something had changed. The silence between them was no longer something to avoid. It was a place where both could breathe. They talked about the garden, the cows, the cellar, practical things, not emotions, but that for them was more intimate than any confession. Before sleeping, Tala stood for a moment by the window. The snow was still falling, but now it was thinner, lighter. It'll be a while before spring comes, Jan said behind her. But if you decide to stay, I can help you build something. A room on the side, a space for you. It doesn't have to be temporary. Tala turned slowly. There was no surprise on her face, just evaluation. You're offering me a place. I'm offering you a choice. She didn't respond immediately, but that night when she got into bed, she didn't do it wrapped like a cocoon, and for the first time she slept without fear in her eyes. The days began to lengthen just a little. The sun was still shy, but its presence lasted longer than before. The ice loosened at the edges, and some icicles dripped during the warmer hours. Nothing dramatic, just small but constant signs. Inside the cabin, the change was clearer, more human. Tala woke up before Jan. She made no noise, just moved with that delicacy of people accustomed to not being seen. She lit the stove, checked the water buckets, cleaned the table. Her limp was still there, but it no longer seemed like a weakness. It was simply part of her walk. And each day the air between them was less dense, easier to breathe. Jan noticed it without looking for it. How she folded the blankets, how she cut the potatoes, how she touched things as if they belonged to her but without assuming they were hers. She never acted entitled, just present. One morning while eating together, she looked up and asked, do you still go to town? He wiped his mouth with his sleeve and nodded. Every few weeks, sometimes more if the weather allows. It's far. 15 miles if the trail is clear, 20 if I have to go around the ridge. She nodded. The people there know you. They know I don't talk much, he said with a half smile, and they don't ask many questions. Tala didn't ask to go. She didn't ask about faces or names, but her questions spoke for her. She was starting to think beyond surviving, and that was already another life. That same afternoon, Jan went down to the barn loft and brought down a pile of old wood. He started stacking it next to the cabin. Irregular planks, some swollen by time, others still strong. Tala watched him from the porch, arms crossed over her chest. Were you serious, she asked, about building something? He dropped a plank firmly onto the pile. I don't usually say things I don't feel. He approached her. They were less than a yard apart. The cold was still there, but it no longer stood between them. Then let me help, she said. Sure, he nodded without hesitating. Jan handed her a hammer, and together they began. It was a simple structure, a small room, strong just enough. It wasn't a symbolic gesture, it was a practical one. A space where she could sleep if she wanted privacy or stay if she wished. She asked questions about the wood, the nails, the alignment. Her hands still ached, but they were determined. She didn't complain when her foot throbbed. She didn't stop. That night back in the cabin, Jan served her a cup of hot cider. You don't have to prove anything to me, he said. She looked at him through the flicker of the fire. I'm not proving, I'm choosing. Nodded because he understood better than anyone. That night after dinner, Jan stood up without a word. He opened a cupboard he hadn't touched in years. From inside, he took out a package wrapped in old cloth. He held it for a few seconds, then he carefully placed it on the table, right in front of her. It was my wife's, he said in a low voice. I didn't want it to stay stored forever. Someone should use it. It was a thick wool coat, mended at the shoulders, but still strong, warm, real. Tala looked at it, then touched it as if the garment might break. Finally, she tried it on. It was big on her, but it covered her body. It covered something more than the cold. Thank you, she said simply. There was no ceremony, no tears, just a concrete, shared gesture. The next morning, she wore it for the first time. They went out together to check the traps near the tree line. It was the first time Tala had set foot beyond the yard since she arrived. She walked slowly, yes, but with firmness. She was no longer the same woman who was fading into the snow. The cold didn't defeat her, she defied it. As they returned, Jan broke the silence. You said there was a child before. Tala lowered her gaze to the snow. Yes, do you want another? She stopped, not because of the question, but because of what it stirred. Her shoulders rose slightly as if something she had buried long ago was being called upon. I used to, she replied. Then I stopped believing I ever could. Jan didn't insist, just walked beside her. After a few steps, Tala added, if I ever had one, I would want it to be born in a place like this. Not in a ceremony, not for a title, just because. Jan felt something tighten in his chest. It wasn't pain, it was something deeper, a shared truth without a name. That night when they finished dinner, Jan did something he hadn't done in nearly a decade. He sat beside her at the table. He didn't say anything at first, just said her name, Tala. She looked up calm. He nodded once, then without pressure, he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a hasty kiss, nor one that sought answers. It was firm, alive. She didn't pull away. On the contrary, she held it, and when they separated just a little, she whispered, "I'm not leaving." And Jan, who had spent entire years waiting for everyone to leave, replied in a low voice, "Good." The kiss didn't change the weather. The snow still clung to the trees. The wind still whispered through the cracks in the cabin. But inside both of them something had shifted. Tala didn't act differently. She didn't demand closeness, didn't alter her routine. The next morning she still got up early, lit the stove, moved with that mix of silence and intention that so defined her. But now when they spoke, their eyes didn't stray. And when their hands accidentally touched on the table or by the fire, neither of them pulled away. Jan noticed it in the gestures, in the breathing, in the way Tala inhabited the space. Not as a guest, not as a passerby, but as someone who had decided to stay without asking permission. They worked together outside again. The cabin extension was already halfway up. The ground under the snow was firm, well packed. Tala held a plank while he nailed it. Her cheeks were red from the cold, and a few strands of hair stuck to her jaw, but her eyes were bright, not with excitement, but with presence. Jan thought about her phrase over and over, "I'm not leaving." He hadn't asked how long that meant. He didn't know if she was talking about a season or a lifetime, but deep down he already knew. She didn't say things she didn't feel, and neither did he. That night after dinner, Tala sat on the cot she still used to sleep. She combed her hair slowly in front of the fire. Jan was greasing the hinges of his trap box. The silence between them was so comfortable it almost felt familiar. Then, without looking at him, she asked, "Do you miss her?" He put down the rag on the table, didn't pretend not to understand, just lowered his head for a moment. For a long time, yes. Tala waited without pushing. She was kind, he said, but life with her was hard, even more so after the child was born. He didn't survive the winter. Tala's hand stopped on her braid, then she resumed the movement. "That's why you built this," she said, not as an assumption, but as understanding. Jan nodded. "I needed distance from everything." "And now," she whispered. Jan looked at her. "Now I don't feel like I'm running anymore." She continued brushing her hair. "You let me in," she said, "not just through the door." He approached, crouched in front of her. There was no hurry, no fear. Tala didn't back away. He took the comb from her, set it aside, and touched her face carefully. She leaned in a little, just enough. They kissed again, this time slower, longer. Her hand rested lightly on his chest, and when they separated, she whispered, "I want this. But on my terms." Jan nodded without hesitation. "It will always be." They stayed like that for a moment together without needing to move fast. Then Tala got up, adjusted the blanket over her shoulders, and went to the fire. Jan followed her. That night they shared a bed for the first time. That night there was no urgency, no need to explain anything. Tala got under the quilt without fear, without rituals, without ceremonies. Her feet, still warm, brushed against Jan's. He put his arms around her, not as someone taking something, but as someone keeping what he had chosen. Their bodies moved in silence, without hurry, without hunger. It was another kind of encounter, a physical conversation between two people who weren't trying to fill a void, but to honor what they were building. The fire continued crackling behind them, casting warm light on the wooden walls, and when they finished, they didn't say a single word. There was no need. In the darkness later, she whispered, "If I carry a child in my womb this time, it will belong to no one but me." Jan stroked her hair and answered in a firm but soft voice, "It will belong to both of us, but no one else." Tala didn't reply, but the way she settled against his chest said everything. Outside, the snow fell again, this time softly, almost delicate, and for the first time in many years, neither of them felt cold. The following days were different, clearer, more defined. The frost on the windows no longer lasted past midday. The roof began to leak at the edges. The hens were laying eggs more frequently. The cows were restless at dawn, and the trees, the old pines around the cabin, began to shake with each gust, letting go of their weight in snow. Inside, it was no longer just a house, it was a home. They shared the bed without talking about it. Tala never used the cot again. Jan stopped pretending that this was temporary. Mornings began with chores, him cutting wood, hauling feed, her boiling water, washing clothes, checking the jars in the pantry. She wore his shirt over the coat he had given her. Her hands were still marked by winter, but now they moved without hesitation. One morning when Jan returned from the barn, he found her sitting at the table looking at her hands. She didn't look sick or sad, but her expression was different, deeper, more focused. He hung up his coat. "What's wrong?" he asked, approaching. Tala looked up. She hesitated. Then she said, almost in a whisper, "Weeks have passed. I haven't bled." Jan didn't move, just looked at her. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Yes." Neither said anything for a while. Then Jan sat down in front of her. His face was serious, not afraid, not anguished, clear. "Do you think it was that night?" "I know it wasn't me," Tala said in a firm voice. Jan exhaled through his nose. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't expecting a celebration. She just wanted to know if there was truth beneath her feet. "Do you feel okay?" "Better than I thought. I haven't had a fever, but I feel something different, something deep." Jan put his hand over hers. "Then we plan it together." She turned her hand and squeezed his tightly. "If this is real, if it grows, I want this child to live like us, without fear, without carrying anyone's name, just here with you, with me." Jan nodded. Then that's what we'll do. They didn't talk about it anymore that day. No rushed plans, no names, no dreams thrown into the air as if the future could be controlled. But the next day, Jan reinforced the windows of the new room they were building. He added an extra layer of insulation. He used the best wood for the joints. He didn't say it, but Tala knew. And at night, without mentioning a word, she began sewing pieces of fabric together, slow, precise stitches. She didn't explain what she was doing. She didn't have to. One morning, as they prepared to check the traps, Jan let out a question that had been circling inside him for days. You said no one knew about the first child you lost. Tala was buttoning her coat. She paused before answering. That's right. Do you want anyone to know now? She didn't answer right away. Then in a soft voice she said, not everyone, just one person. Jan nodded as if he already knew the answer. Your mother. Tala looked at him. She's still in the tribe. She didn't fight for me when they threw me out, but she cried. I saw her. She couldn't stop it, but she knew it was wrong. Jan took a deep breath. When the thaw comes, he said, we'll go down the mountain. You'll leave a message at the trading post. Tala nodded. Not with emotion, but with a gratitude without artifice. I just want her to know that I lived, that I didn't die in the snow. Jan approached and touched her cheek. We'll make sure she knows. Days later, a coyote came too close to the chicken coop. Jan fired from the porch just once right at its shoulder. He didn't kill it. He scared it off. Tala watched him in silence as the animal limped away alive. Most would have killed it without thinking, she said. Jan replied without looking back. It wasn't hunting. Hungry? She looked at him with a new depth. Have you seen too much death to chase it anymore? He turned his face towards her. Then I know you. Tala nodded. That's why I'm here. That night when they lay down, they made no promises. They didn't talk about the future, but the silence was different, heavier, truer. The new room wasn't finished yet, but it already had a roof. Tala lay back, and in the darkness she whispered, this child will be born in stillness, not in ceremony, not in fire. Jan put his arm around her waist. It will be born in choice. She closed her eyes, and for the first time she slept deeply, not from exhaustion, but from true rest. Spring didn't arrive suddenly. It never did up there. It arrived as true things do, slowly, with small signs that only the attentive notice. The icicles shortened. The tree sap glistened on the bark. The cabin roof began to drip insistently at midday. In areas where the sun hit directly, the snow receded without drama. Inside the cabin, things were also changing, not with words, but with deeds. Tala's belly was just